I never expected silence to feel this loud. After the funeral, after the casseroles and condolences, and after everyone went back to their regular lives like they'd flipped some switch, all that was left in our house was that silence. It filled every corner of the living room, crept under the bedroom doors, sat in the hallway like fog. Our one-story home had always been too small growing up, Oliver's toys scattered in the kitchen, his voice echoing from room to room, but now the place felt cavernous. Too big, too empty. Oliver had been 10 years old. 10 years and 4 months if you counted the days, which I did without meaning to. The accident happened on a Sunday. We weren't even doing anything special, just a quick stop at the grocery store, a bike ride around the neighborhood. One second he was yelling that his shoelace was coming undone, and the next he was on the curb, his head at the wrong angle, his scooter in pieces, and Mom screaming like her body was breaking apart. It's strange how many people tell you what to feel when you lose someone. Grief comes in waves, they say, like it's supposed to mean something, or you'll get closure. But there's nothing closed about walking by your little brother's door and seeing his shoes still by the mat, his backpack still leaning against the wall, homework unfinished inside. At night, I would just lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. I couldn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because the tears just wouldn't come anymore. I'd used them all up at the hospital when they told us he was gone. It started about 2 weeks after he died. A Thursday night, it was after 10. My parents had gone to bed early. They barely spoke to each other anymore. Sometimes they would watch TV in the living room, side by side, but the distance between them on the couch might as well have been miles. I was lying in bed, textbook open in front of me, pretending to study for my last round of finals. My brain wasn't absorbing anything. It was all white noise, diagrams, formulas, paragraphs I couldn't focus on. So when I heard something from the other side of the house, my ears perked up instantly. It was a sound I knew, a light scuffle, plastic scraping on wood, a familiar clatter like Lego bricks being pushed into a pile. Then something bumped gently against a wall, a muffled thud like a box being shifted. I sat there for a long time, frozen, the pages of my textbook forgotten. Oliver. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't calling my name, but it was the exact sound I used to hear when he stayed up late in his room, playing quietly with his action figures or stacking blocks into tall towers, only for them to collapse in a chain reaction of plastic and frustration. At first, I thought maybe it was Mom or Dad cleaning out his room. Maybe they had decided to go in there and finally start putting his things away. But that didn't make sense. It was past 10. The lights had been off for over an hour, and anyway, my parents hadn't stepped foot in his room since the day of the accident. They couldn't. I'd seen Mom stand at the doorway a few times with folded laundry in her arms, but she never went inside. The sounds stopped. I stared at the ceiling, my heart beating harder than it should have. My bedroom was across the hall from Oliver's, just a short walk past the linen closet. I couldn't stop myself. I got up, opened the door slowly, and peeked into the hallway. Darkness. Our house always felt different at night. I used to think it was just because I was older, aware of the creaks and groans of an aging home, but that night, something else lingered in the air. A heaviness, the kind you feel before a thunderstorm, like the walls were holding their breath. I tiptoed to Oliver's room. His door was closed. I hesitated, then pressed my ear against it. Nothing. No more scraping, no blocks or toys, no breathing. I turned the knob slowly. The door creaked open. His room looked untouched, exactly the way it had been since the morning before the accident. His twin bed was still unmade. The cartoon comforter had one corner flipped over. His favorite hoodie was crumpled on the floor near the foot of the bed. His desk was cluttered with a chaotic mix of markers, small toys, a half-built Lego base. His nightlight, the green dinosaur one, was still plugged in. It didn't glow anymore. Burned out a few days after the funeral, I stood there, trying to decide if I'd imagined the sounds. Maybe the air vent had clicked. Maybe the neighbors had dropped something and it echoed weird through the wall. Maybe. I didn't go in. I just shut the door again softly and went back to my room. That night I barely slept. It didn't happen every night. That almost made it worse. Sometimes a whole week would pass in complete silence. I'd think I'd moved on. I'd convince myself that it had all been some half-awake dream. But then, without warning, it would start again. I'd be up late working on an essay, and from down the hall I'd hear the click, click, click of spinning wheels on plastic tracks. Oliver had a Hot Wheels set he adored. He used to line up the cars and send them through the loop again and again until they flipped or flew off the end. It was exactly that sound. Other times I heard softer things, rustling like sheets being pulled or the faint squeak of his desk chair turning. One night, I swore I heard the quiet, mechanical roar of his battery-powered dinosaur, the one he loved when he was 5. It only ever made that sound when the batteries were low, dragging the roar out in a slow, dying moan. I stopped telling myself it was the house. One night, about a month after the first noise, I told my dad what I'd been hearing. Not everything, just that I heard something in Oliver's room, something strange. He was in the kitchen fixing a cup of tea, something he started doing every night after he stopped drinking. He paused halfway to the table and turned to look at me. His eyes were tired. The skin under them was dark, like he hadn't slept in a long time. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something. Then he just nodded, slow and silent. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make a joke. He just sat down and stirred his tea, metal clinking gently against ceramic. That was all he ever said. The worst part was how normal the noises were. They weren't supernatural. They weren't dramatic. No doors slammed. No voices whispered. No shadows darted across the walls. Everything I heard was something Oliver had done when he was alive, and that's what got under my skin. It was like the house remembered him, and it was replaying him, like a record that kept skipping to the same sounds. Like it was trying to remind me, or maybe trying to keep him here. I started checking his room more often. At first, I'd wait until morning, but eventually I started checking right after I heard something. Every time, it looked exactly the same. No footprints on the carpet, no toys moved, but I'd feel something, like the room was warmer than it should be, like the air was heavier, like someone had just been there and stepped out seconds before I opened the door. I didn't tell Mom. She didn't sleep much anymore. I'd wake up to find her in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. Sometimes she'd be sitting on the couch with the TV on, but no volume, just watching the picture, just existing. One morning I walked past Oliver's room and saw the door open. My breath caught. It had been closed the night before. I remembered because I always checked now. I always made sure it stayed closed. I looked inside. Nothing had moved. Not visibly. But I noticed something small. A comic book on his nightstand had shifted positions just slightly, like someone had picked it up and put it back without thinking. I closed the door again, slowly. That day, I skipped school. I walked aimlessly around the park where we used to ride bikes. I sat under the tree near the baseball field where we'd once watched fireworks. I kept waiting for the grief to feel smaller, but all it did was stretch out wider, like a shadow over everything. That night, I couldn't stop looking at the crack under my door. It was narrow, just a slim line of darkness between the wood and the floor, but it felt impossibly vast. Like something could be standing on the other side at any moment, staring, listening. I kept thinking about that comic book, the way it had moved, just a few inches, just enough to notice if you knew what to look for. I stayed up longer than usual, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, the brightness turned low enough to keep from waking anyone. Around 12:30 a.m., I finally turned it off, rolled onto my side, and pulled the blankets over my shoulder. I didn't expect to sleep. I just wanted to rest my eyes. I was somewhere in that strange middle place, half asleep, half aware, when I heard the first step. It wasn't loud, just a soft creak of floorboards near the kitchen. Then another, then one more. At first, I told myself it was Dad. Sometimes he got up to get water, but the way the steps moved, slow, careful, deliberate, they didn't sound like my dad's footsteps. His were heavier. These were tentative, like whoever or whatever it was didn't want to be heard. The steps crossed from tile to carpet. I could tell by the way the sound shifted. And then they kept going. Through the hallway, closer. Every board in that hallway had its own voice. You lived in this house long enough, you got to know which ones creaked with weight and which ones flexed without a sound. The steps past Oliver's door, one at a time. They were too slow to be sleepwalking, too light to be Mom. I stopped breathing. They reached outside my room and stopped. I stared at the ceiling. My eyes adjusted just enough to see faint outlines of my furniture. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it would punch through the mattress. I waited. Nothing. The hallway was silent again, but the silence wasn't empty. I didn't open the door. I didn't even move. Eventually, sometime before sunrise, I must have drifted off. But when I woke up the next morning, the feeling still clung to my skin like sweat. The next night, it happened again. A little earlier this time, just after midnight. The same pattern. Soft steps, almost thoughtful, coming down the hall, pausing in front of Oliver's room, then continuing, slower near my door, always stopping there. I tried telling myself I was dreaming. I tried recording with my phone one night, placing it face down on my nightstand with the voice memo app running. But when I played it back the next day, all I heard was my own breathing. Maybe the microphone hadn't picked up the sound. Maybe it never happened at all. But it did. It happened again and again, never at the same time, but always in that window after midnight. Always stopping in front of my room, always waiting. The footsteps never tried the doorknob, never knocked, never moved past my door to reach the end of the hallway. They always came from the direction of the living room, past Oliver's door, and paused outside mine before disappearing. I never heard them leave. They just stopped. Like whatever was out there had melted into the floor. I started keeping a flashlight under my pillow. I never used it. But it made me feel like I could, if I had to, if I needed to see something. The thought of turning it on and finding someone, or something, standing there, though, was almost worse than the darkness. My grades started slipping. I stopped answering texts. Mom noticed, but she didn't push. She had her own shadows to deal with. Dad was quiet, too. He stayed up later than he used to, watching old war movies in the living room with the volume low. I wondered if he heard them too, if the footsteps passed him on their way down the hall. He never said anything. One night I stayed up on purpose. I didn't try to sleep. I sat in bed, staring at the hallway through the tiny gap under the door, watching the lightless space for any change. Just after 1 a.m., the boards groaned. One by one, the steps came, slowly, softly. I watched that sliver of darkness under the door thicken just slightly, enough that I knew something was standing there. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My body was ice. There was no shadow to see, but I could feel it, just on the other side, not breathing, not shifting, just standing. Then, as if satisfied, the presence faded. The pressure lifted. The floor didn't creak again. It was just gone. In the morning, everything looked normal, but the hallway felt different, like it had been touched, like the air had been rearranged overnight. That day, I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at the wall. I didn't want to sleep in my room anymore, but I didn't want to sleep anywhere else either. I started stacking things in front of the door, books, my backpack, even a small chair once. It wasn't to block anything. It wouldn't have stopped anyone. It just made me feel like I'd know if something tried to come in. That didn't help either. A few days later, I found the chair nudged out of the way when I woke up. Not much, just a few inches, but I hadn't moved it. The house never felt right after that. There were no new noises, no scratching, no banging, but the footsteps returned, sometimes circling twice in one night. Sometimes starting from Oliver's room instead of the living room. Once, I swear I heard the doorknob on his door turn, just a faint metallic click. Nothing ever opened. But the air afterward felt wrong, as if something had gotten loose. I began dreaming about footsteps. I'd hear them coming down the hall just like always. But in the dream, I would open the door, and the hallway would stretch endlessly, walls getting narrower the farther I looked. At the end of it would be Oliver, standing barefoot in his pajamas, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Like he was asking me something without words. And behind him, always behind him, was something else, something tall. I'd always wake up before it got closer. One night, I stayed awake until almost 4. The hallway remained quiet. I let myself believe it was over, that maybe the thing had moved on. I got up to use the bathroom, avoiding eye contact with the dark hallway mirror. When I stepped out and turned toward my bedroom, I stopped. Oliver's door was open, just a crack, maybe 2 inches, but it had been closed when I passed it 5 minutes earlier. I knew it had. I stood there for a long time, staring. I didn't go in. I just reached out, pushed the door gently until it latched, and backed into my room without turning my back on the hall. I didn't sleep after that, and I stopped opening his door altogether, because every time I did, the air inside felt heavier, like something was standing just out of view, waiting, watching. And I was starting to think it didn't want me to leave anymore. The shadow appeared in the corner of my room for the first time on a Monday night, sometime after 2 a.m. I wasn't even facing that direction when it happened. I was curled toward the wall, eyes half closed, not quite asleep but close. The kind of dazed state where your thoughts drift without making sense. But then something changed in the room. I didn't hear anything. I didn't smell anything. I just felt it, like the air behind me had thickened, like I wasn't alone. My body locked up. I didn't move, didn't roll over, just stayed frozen, every muscle waiting. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me not to. But eventually, after what felt like an hour of silence and not breathing, I turned my head just enough to glance toward the far corner of the room, next to my closet, just beyond the edge of the desk. It was darker there than it should have been. No moonlight reached that spot, but even in the dark, I should have been able to make out shapes, the base of the floor lamp, the corner of my laundry hamper. But I couldn't see any of that. The corner wasn't empty. There was something standing there. It wasn't moving. It wasn't swaying. It was just there, motionless, as if it had always been part of the room and I'd only just noticed. I stared at it for a long time. It was shaped like a person, broad at the shoulders, narrowing near what I guessed were legs. It had no glow, no eyes, no outline, just absence, a figure made entirely of wrongness. The longer I looked, the more my mind tried to fill in details that weren't there. A head tilted slightly, arms at its sides, facing me. I turned away, pulled the blanket up over my neck, and stayed that way until dawn crept in through the window. When the light hit that corner, it was just a wall again. Empty, clean, but the feeling hadn't left. I kept catching myself glancing over at that spot throughout the day, like my eyes were trying to confirm it was still gone, that I hadn't imagined it. That night, I left the light on. The shadow didn't return. Not that night. But the next night, it came back. Same corner, same posture, same heavy silence. Only this time, I felt it earlier, around 1:30. I sat up in bed and looked at it directly. It didn't move. It didn't react. But I knew it was watching me. I whispered, "Oliver?" Before I could stop myself. Nothing, not even a flicker. It just stood there, and that was somehow worse than a reply. I left the lamp on again the night after that, but it didn't help. Because the shadow didn't need darkness to exist. I saw it standing there even with the light on, faint but unmistakable, a distortion in the corner, like a smudge on a photo. Like reality couldn't quite figure out what to do with that space. Sometimes it wasn't there when I went to bed. Sometimes it showed up later. And once it was already there when I walked into the room. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I tried telling myself it was just my imagination, that my brain, starved for rest and fried by grief, was starting to crack. But the fear I felt was real, the feeling of being studied, of being recognized. I stopped using the closet. I stopped sitting at my desk. I started changing clothes in the bathroom. I avoided the corner. But it didn't avoid me. Once I woke up and it had moved, not far, just enough. It was still in the corner but closer, a step or two toward the bed. I could see its outline more clearly, its shape sharper, the angle of its arms, the tilt of its head. It was still, but it was closer. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't even blink. That morning I felt like I hadn't slept in years. I tried burning sage. I'd read somewhere online that it might help. I didn't believe it, but I was desperate. I lit it and walked through the room in tight circles, waving it toward the corners. The smoke filled the air. I coughed. My eyes burned. I kept whispering, "You need to go," over and over. The next night, the shadow didn't appear. I almost cried. But the night after that, it came back. Same spot, same silence, almost like it had been waiting to see what I'd do next. The worst part? I was starting to feel used to it. That scared me more than anything, because a part of me wanted to believe it was Oliver, that somehow some piece of him had stayed behind, that the footsteps, the sounds in his room, the open door, the shifted comic book, all of it had been him trying to stay close. But that shadow, it wasn't him. I could feel it. It was something else, something that had slipped in through the cracks he left behind. I started doing research, quietly, carefully, in incognito mode on my laptop so my parents wouldn't see. I searched for hauntings, ghosts, poltergeists, shadow people, all the terms I'd once thought were stupid. Most of it was garbage, recycled stories, fake photos. But a few things stood out. People who'd lost a loved one and then started hearing things, seeing things, feeling watched. The descriptions varied, but some were close. Too close. One post mentioned shadows that weren't tied to the dead, but to the grieving, that sometimes grief itself became a doorway. Another said that if you saw it once and it saw you, it wouldn't leave. I slammed the laptop shut after that. For the next few days, I couldn't eat. I barely spoke. My mom started asking if I wanted to talk to someone. My dad offered to take me fishing, which he hadn't done since I was 12. I said no. I couldn't explain what was happening, not without sounding insane, not without making them afraid too. The nights stretched longer. I barely slept. The shadow came back almost every night now, sometimes twice. It never moved closer than a few feet from the bed, but I started feeling it even when I wasn't looking. It watched. It waited. One night, I turned on every light in the room and sat on the floor, back against the wall, facing the corner. And I waited too. I sat there for hours. The lights made the room hot. My skin itched, my eyes burned, but I didn't look away. And sometime after 3 a.m., I felt the cold roll in. It didn't make a sound. It didn't announce itself. But the temperature dropped like a curtain falling, and I knew it was there. The shadow stood in the corner, barely visible under the fluorescent hum. But I saw it. I asked again, "Oliver, is that you?" No response. It tilted its head. A small, sharp motion. Then stillness. I didn't move. Eventually, I fell asleep sitting up. When I woke up, the lights were still on, and the corner was empty. But the room didn't feel safe anymore. Not even in the morning. Not even with sunlight spilling in through the blinds. The shadow hadn't just come back, it had made itself at home. I stopped going into Oliver's room altogether. Even during the day, something about it felt wrong. Not just heavy or quiet, but expectant, like the room was holding its breath. I'd pass by and feel the shift in air pressure without stepping a foot inside. Sometimes I thought I could hear the chair at his desk creak. Once I found the closet door cracked open when I knew I'd seen it shut the night before. The footsteps continued, always between midnight and 2 a.m., always stopping outside my room. Sometimes they stayed longer. Sometimes I could hear what sounded like the faintest shuffle, like someone repositioning themselves, settling in. I moved my bed farther from the corner. It didn't matter. The shadow still came. The only thing that changed was the distance between us. Sometimes I tried staying awake just to watch it. Sometimes I thought it was watching me too. The longer I lived with it, the more I began to realize it didn't behave like Oliver. It didn't feel like a brother. It felt like something else had seen what my grief left behind and taken the shape of a memory. The lines started to blur. Days folded into nights. The sounds from Oliver's room started again, even louder than before. Clacking plastic, shifting fabric, thumps against the wall. But I stopped checking. I couldn't bear to, because I didn't know what I'd find. Or worse, what I wouldn't. I started dreaming of hallways again, long ones that went on forever. I'd walk them barefoot, hearing footsteps ahead of me but never catching up. At the end, I'd always find a closed door. Sometimes Oliver stood behind it, sometimes the shadow did, sometimes both. I began waking up to small changes in my room. Once my blanket had been pulled up tight to my chin, tucked in too neatly. Another time, my chair was turned to face the bed. Once my phone had been placed face down on the desk, screen wiped clean of anything I'd been looking at before falling asleep. I never heard the door open, I never saw it move, but it was getting closer, not in space, but in familiarity. It was learning the rhythms of the room, of me. The night before I left for college, I didn't sleep at all. My bags were packed, boxes loaded in the car. I kept telling myself that leaving would mean starting fresh, that I could escape whatever this was, that it was tied to the house, to Oliver's room, to everything that had gone wrong. But that night, as I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the corner and waiting, something changed. The shadow didn't appear. At first, I thought I'd finally broken the cycle, that maybe acknowledging it, surviving it, preparing to leave, maybe that had been enough. But as the minutes passed and the room remained empty, I didn't feel relief. I felt watched, not from the corner, not from the hallway, from everywhere. It was like the house itself was staring at me. I whispered goodbye before sunrise, not to my parents, not to Oliver, but to the thing that had been following me from room to room, night after night, growing stronger. It didn't answer, but I could feel it listening. We didn't talk about Oliver on the drive to campus. My mom cried a little when she hugged me. My dad helped carry a box into my dorm room and told me to stick it out, even if it's weird at first. I said I would. My roommate hadn't arrived yet. The room was small, 2 beds, 2 desks, 1 shared window that looked out over the edge of the quad. Generic furniture, pale walls, everything sterile and unfamiliar. I unpacked slowly. I put up a few photos, my friends, a shot of my parents from last Christmas, and one of Oliver, grinning with 2 missing teeth, holding up a crooked Lego ship. I stared at that one the longest. Then I taped it to the inside of the closet door. I thought that would be the end of it. That night, the dorm was noisy. People laughing, doors slamming, the faint thump of music from somewhere above. I lay in bed, too wired to sleep, earbuds in, hoping noise would drown out whatever my thoughts tried to conjure. Around 2 in the morning, I pulled them out. And I felt it, instantly. The stillness, the weight in the air. My new room didn't creak like the hallway at home, but I could feel the temperature shift, and in the far corner, beside the dresser, beneath the window, a patch of darkness refused to fade. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was there, no taller than before, no closer than before, but somehow more comfortable, like it belonged, like it had followed me. I didn't speak to it. I didn't ask if it was Oliver, because I knew now it wasn't. It had never been. It had only worn his outline. It had studied me in that house, grown familiar with my breathing, my sleep schedule, my guilt, and now it was here. It didn't need the old house anymore. It needed me. I rolled over, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and stared at the wall. I didn't sleep. I haven't really, not since the day Oliver died. Because every time I close my eyes now, I see it, not just in corners, not just in doorways, but behind my eyelids, waiting, watching, remembering everything I let it become. It never needed my brother. It only needed an invitation, and grief was enough.